You're listening to the Multifamily Innovation Show with Patrick Antrim, your source for innovative strategies for multifamily professionals, CEOs, executive leaders, and aspiring leaders that want to drive high-performance results for their property or portfolio.
Tell us a little bit about your role at Mark Taylor, what you do and how you serve.
So I am the Vice President of Brand and Marketing, so I oversee kind of that broad umbrella of functions within the marketing piece. I'm one of three executives at Mark Taylor. Mark Taylor is a 35-year-old company that originated here in Phoenix, Arizona. We are the largest commercial developer in the history of the state. Currently, we oversee roughly 67 Class A assets here in Phoenix. We are exclusively a Class A developer and property manager. 80% of our portfolio is fee-based, so third party. We manage for folks like Goldman Sachs, UBS, Premier Group. The list is long, and we feel very fortunate. And so my role with a team of 5 is to ensure that we deliver the highest quality value proposition for our product to a very targeted audience, that coveted Class A renter here in Phoenix. It's a hotly contested marketplace, as you know, since we're here in Scottsdale, for those that don't know.
Yeah.
By the way, I love your new digs. Awesome.
Yes.
Very, very cool. And the live music is a nice touch.
Yeah. Get you into that emotional state,
No, I feel good. It was a nice break. Yeah. Got to depart from early meetings and come and join you. Yeah. It's a very interesting time. Excited to talk about what's happening with us and how we've kind of tackled the communication challenges associated with COVID. And grateful for the opportunity to sit here, follow the Freemans. They looked great.
Yeah.
Sounds like a book I need to pick up.
So, yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So speaking of that, internal communications, how did you guys approach that with the recent shifts that we had to make due to the pandemic and COVID and all the ways that we had to work, find new ways to lease, stay open, all of that stuff? How did you engage the internal teams?
Yeah, so it really is kind of a challenge. So it's interesting. I'll give you some context. I have a brother that recently lived in Seattle who was working for Amazon. I visited him the week leading up to March 1st of last year. Seattle was in full lockdown. Phoenix had, the standard issue. Folks were readying for spring training. We were getting excited for sunshine. And it was as if COVID didn't exist here. Arrived back in office on Monday, raised the flag. We had an all hands meeting, said, we're not sure what's happening,
right.
But it doesn't look good, right? So in preparation for this, what do we need to do? So we identified our key stakeholders, right? We have our residents, we have our prospects, we have our clients, we have our internal team. What are their needs going to be? What does this look like elsewhere? So we started to lean on the Arizona Multi-Housing Association, which is a tremendous industry group here in Arizona.
Right.
We're very lucky to have it. We leaned on the CDC, the AZDHS. I led that effort since I was the one that raised the flag. And what we did was we said, hey, something's coming initially. So we set the stage, which is probably going to create some challenges operationally for us in the following ways. We don't yet have answers, but we want to let you know ahead of time that things are probably going to follow what we're seeing in other large metro areas. And it can include, offices closing down, et cetera. And so when we started to wrap our arms around what it looked like, we realized that we were going to see large-scale closures, right? And then changes in behavior. And we didn't know if that was going to create, pattern changes within our prospects, within our residents, et cetera. But we knew we were probably going to have to force it. So we were going to find out what was going to happen. So the key for us was 2 things. We wanted to make sure that we were first, right, to our residents and our employees with what's going on. So they felt like they weren't discovering stuff outside of our purview. And then the second piece, we wanted to make sure that we were right when we came forward with it. We very judicious with our decision making. We wanted to make sure that if we were closing our amenity spaces, we wouldn't be reopening them in a week. That this wasn't a game of push and pull.
Right.
And so the answers were very helpful that the AMA provided. They did their work here. Again, the Arizona Multi-Housing Association. It's a wonderful industry group. They dug in with their legal team. They leaned in with the CDC. At the time, it was President Trump's steering committee, and really understood what is this probably going to look like and how long is it going to last. Once we realized what that was going to be, we set a regular cadence around the different pieces were starting to fall. So you started to see closures of gyms, and then you started to see closures of restaurants. You started to see all these things start to happen via executive order. And then it begged the question, well, who's an essential service? Governor Ducey here in the state of Arizona and Governor Sisolak in Las Vegas, where our property teams exist, were very expeditious with their definition of who qualified for an essential service. So it helped us. We qualified as property managers, which meant we were going to be working still, which meant we were going to be driving to work still. But we had the unusual situation of protecting our own employees from our residents, and vice versa. Right? We didn't know just how this transferred. COVID was still largely unknown, and there was a lot of fear-based angst associated with it. So by arming both our employees and our residents with answers as best as we could, and we always framed any sort of inbound inquiry from a resident or an external vendor with this kind of prefix statement before we kind of answered their question. We said, we are not a news source, right? We are not an information clearinghouse, but here's what we know. Right? We know that this doesn't look like it's going to be a brief kind of interlude where we grapple with what all of this means. It looks like it's going to be sustained. Out of an abundance of caution, here's what we're doing. And then we would say, we're closing our clubhouse, we're closing our amenity spaces. We're doing it thoughtfully. This isn't us. We recognize that there's going to be a sense of loss for you as well. So as a kind of an interim solution, we've created a scheduler that tucks into our resident app, right? So we have a single point of truth for our residents. We ask them to submit their service requests, pay their rent, do all of the kind of the ancillary items that are associated with living within a community via this app. And so our partner, the Henry team, who provide our resident portal platform, they fast forwarded the creation of a resident scheduler, which allowed that resident to create time pockets where they could come in and see us. Formerly, as everybody knows here on that's familiar with multifamily, right, it's a bit of a free-for-all on properties, Patrick. So, you have your high-touch residents who, and obviously all of our residents are equally lovely, but we particularly like the ones who come in and create a personal relationship with us. The challenge is that when you lock your offices, that no longer exists, and there's a sense of loss for your residents. And that sense of loss can manifest into a sense of, hey, I'm not actually getting what I'm paying for here. So we wanted to preserve this sense that, hey, we're doing as best we can to protect ourselves, not only ourselves, but you as well. So we created this scheduler via new technology, right? And this is how we answered the resident piece. And we allocated a specific set of time. We were very conscientious about how we communicated it. We asked that if anybody had questions, they could reach out to our property teams. And we allowed them a new channel. And we introduced a new channel, which had the unintended effect of creating some structure or lending to more structure in our day for our property teams, right? The day-to-day mandate for our property teams, if you're a Mark Taylor employee, is pretty, vast. There's a lot that we ask them to do, right? We run large teams. So by saying, hey, from this specific time period, this is going to be your resident period, they're going to be scheduling via this, they're going to get you your undivided attention, which is actually kind of unusual in previous form. There aren't going to be interruptions. Our property teams can prepare for your meeting, right? It's very different than just dropping by or picking up the phone and calling the teams. So it felt more tangible. It felt more substantive. There was value there that was discovered by us at the time that we weren't anticipating. We think we're going to carry that through, candidly. It's a really interesting approach that we like, and it's proven to be received very well by our residents. The second piece that was surprising for us is that by allowing or introducing structure to our day from an operational standpoint, we've been able to be more productive. We hire a very specific personality type and profile at Mark Taylor. These are, achiever oriented. These are people who are structured. These are folks that want to achieve. They don't like to have, they realize inbox zero is not a reality at the end of the day, but they like to have the inbox, managed, right?
Right.
And so this has been duly effective there as well. One of the other pieces I think that will be helpful for our audience is, well, if your doors are locked, how do you still create a sense of warmth and invitation? Because this is a drive-by city, Phoenix is, which is why when you drive around the city, you see the abundance of developments that are occurring here. You'll always see fence wraps, signages, etc., as folks are trying to generate pre-lease wait lists, right? It's a drive-by culture. We had to address that as well. So by addressing our residents, we indirectly addressed our employees, and then we had the last piece, which was our prospects, right? The prospects it's a challenge here. We know that 8% of the total available prospect universe in Arizona qualifies as a Class A capable prospect, meaning it's a small pond, and we're all fighting for that coveted Class A renter. So we wanted to ensure that white glove experience folks had come to know and experience with Mark Taylor, that persisted. And by adding a Ring doorbell to the front of our doors, what we did was we introduced a familiar element. And this isn't groundbreaking, guys. I know I'm not trying to sound like we're curing cancer here, but there were a lot of questions at the start of this. And so by introducing the Ring doorbell, we allowed our property teams to remain focused on what they're doing, right? The doorbell will notify you via an app on your phone if you're not in office, or it will notify you via an audible ring within the office. So you had folks that were given a path to communicate with us in an obvious fashion, a familiar fashion, a doorbell. And then you had property teams, while this was a new way for them to operate, it was still semi-familiar as well. A lot of folks have Ring doorbells, is what we've come to find out. So there wasn't a lot of low fidelity interaction there. We didn't create a lot of contentiousness. The last piece was, well, okay, folks, if they're going to opt in for your Class A community, right, they need to be able to see themselves living at your community. So how do they do that? That was an interesting challenge. Another local brand, SmartRent, was a terrific partner for this with us in building, or I would say Final Mile. They had a product already, but kind of final miling a product that is a self-touring product, and we've come to like. In that, what it did was it provided an avenue for our prospects to actually go and visit our property, absent a property team member, on their own time. Right? This is a scheduler that you can schedule a tour for yourself at any time. Right? We do have some windows. There aren't 3 a.m. tours, but this created more optionality for them. And in fact, when you talk about your target demo who for us is what we term the modern millennial. Millennials like the idea of a softer sell anyway. They're not interested in a hard sell. So this actually kind of met a need they didn't even know they wanted. They're smart. Our modern millennials, they grew up with parents who lost their homes in 07, 08. They understand what being house poor means and how the effect it can have on you should there be some undulations in the economy. They don't want to give up all the trappings of home. They're not interested in living in the Spartan life of a college resident. They want all of the accoutrements of having a home without all the responsibility and the risk, which is why you're seeing what we believe is a broad migration towards the Class A community. And so they're thoughtful is the point here for everybody. They're thoughtful, they're tech-centric. This wasn't something that landed with a thud for them. So that's been very helpful for us as you're asking, as you ask, kind of how have you handled this from a communication standpoint? We created technology channels that facilitated communicating with us, right? So there wasn't just a hard stop for them. We needed to create the conduit so that they could, in fact, find us. So the last piece, the final piece from a tech standpoint, and if I'm rushing this, feel free to jump in, is we created our own AI chat capability, right? So that we could functionally support the self-touring. It could roll into our CRM. I mentioned we had a CRM built for us by a team, the Dwell team, and we have since created this chatbot that lives on both of our web properties. We operate a dual website footprint. We talked about this last year. We aren't on ILSs. We rely on our own kind of inertia from a brand and our own digital footprint to drive a fully branded search experience. We're not pushing our prospects anywhere else. But when we push them to our sites, how do they in fact engage us? Well, they can still pick up a phone, and they oftentimes do. During COVID, we recognized also that answering the phone became ever more important as everybody recognized that, there's probably less movement in this space, right? So while the phone still rang and the emails were still received from the form fills from the website, the addition of the AI chat channel has been very helpful for us because it's allowed, again, a low-touch experience. Some folks don't answer the phone after they call, and if you don't answer the phone and you write them back, or you email them back, or you text them back, or you phone them back, they've moved on to the next thing. You got to be the first fish to that hook in the water. So it's been really interesting to see that now upwards of 40% of all of our tours, Patrick, are scheduled via our chat tool. It's just a reality of what's happening within our space. So it's still early. Kind of the understandings are still coming in, but the value thereof of kind of pivoting and investing quickly in new technology has been very helpful for us.
So how do you go about doing that? Now, I would imagine that the employees that are coming in, maybe new employees or the ones that are already there, are seeing you invest in these technologies and seeing, they're using these technologies when they're ordering food, right? At home.
Yep.
They're going to the airport. They're using a lot of these technologies, and now they're coming into where they may work. In some organizations, those technologies don't exist. Either A, they have not partnered with other partners, or they have not built it themselves. I'm interested in the conversation you're having internally and selling this to the board, the committee, the owners, the investors, whatever that looks like, to get this going at such a rapid pace, because it makes sense with how you share that.
Yeah, so it is interesting, and we have our ownership principles. We're cognizant of this. It's really about communicating. Here's what we're seeing. This is the challenge we're confronted with. We think we have an answer. This is what it looks like. We will fail quickly if it doesn't work. That's it. And as long as they're not discovering after the fact, that's what's best, right? And we had very engaged ownership groups, right? Very engaged ownership groups that wanted to know exactly how we were going to deliberately and judiciously approach everything that we did, right? What is signage going to look like on property? How are you messaging social distancing without positioning your property teams as a good cop, bad cop? This is not a position we want to be in. We don't want to be enforcing, social distancing rules, et cetera, at pools. Right. That's not what we want to do. We're not the bad guys. We're not the good guys. We are the ones that are looking out for your best interests simultaneously to us doing that as well. So part of this from a client perspective, since you asked about ownership, was making sure that we managed the perception of what we're doing well. So part of it was communication. The second piece was the activity. We had very obvious cleaning schedules. We had cleaning sheets that were placed in very obvious positions where anybody that was entering the fitness center could feel fully confident this had been addressed, that the cleanliness standards they were expecting, we committed to, were being met. All of this was thoughtfully conceived, by a larger group effort, right? And then broadly, that approach was undertaken by the AMA, who pushed that out as well. So this was a dual effort, right? A partnership. Sure. Working with the governor as well and understanding kind of timing on things, getting the ability. We leaned in heavily, right? The governor was the only one that could tell us when these, effectively when these amenities could reopen, for example. And guys, everybody that runs an apartment community understands just how important the pool is to a community, the fitness center is a community, the barbecue is a community, the playground, the clubhouse, the movie room, everything that you may have. And when you take that, you better have a good reason. And if you don't have a time frame when they're going to see it back, when we're going to be able to return it to them, you have to say that explicitly. Again, no surprises. Guys, this is kind of there is an unknown period associated with this. As soon as we know, we will let you know. So early notification, again, to employees and their residents, reduce that associated anxiety that turns into angst and creates opportunities for them to drift or to abandon the brand. And that's not something we were hoping. That was something obviously we were cognizant of as we approached this.
Yeah, and I love what you said earlier. You said we don't have the answers, but and we're not the media, we're not the news source, but here's what we know.
Here's what we know.
And because people will, in the absence of at least some information, they're going to fill it in with their own doubts, fears, and assumptions, and
100%.
come up with their own story. So you're really getting out in front of that, not controlling, but influencing the message. And we're beginning on this journey. We're in this together.
That's right.
Here we go. And an expectation. How did you keep the culture alive during all this with the employees? Because this is a lot to go through for on-site maintenance, the whole group.
Yeah, so this is a lead out front moment, right? And if you're a leader at your company, you should look for these opportunities. This is just my personal opinion. You can scoff at it. But this is the opportunity where you can flex and go, look. And by flexing, I mean listening first and really understanding, hey, what are the back channel conversations? This is a distributed workforce in multifamily, right? And we don't all get to collide in an office. So it's really incumbent upon us to really be paying attention, asking the right questions. What are you guys hearing on property amongst your service team? What is the leasing team saying? What are the residents saying? What is the volume of inbounds on our resident portal? What are the phone calls? What is the general tone? What is the sentiment? Right? Are we doing enough? Are we doing a little? So cadencing communication was important. How affirmative we were in our disposition. We don't want to take a position absent perfect knowledge. So we wanted to be playing a bit of, we wanted to take more of a ambiguous approach while saying explicitly, here's what we know. Governor Ducey did this, et cetera, which means we have to do this. You will start to see these happening in this time frame. Should you have any questions, concerns, here's how you approach that. The big piece for us that was helpful, and again, not rocket science, was creating an FAQ, right? So what are the common questions that we're starting to receive? Property team, here's your FAQ. If you're asked this, this is how you respond. Okay. It was interesting for me to employ that approach because that was something I learned from kind of a previous life, in handling, when I worked in, manufacturing, American manufacturing, yes, for 15 years. And you have sales teams that are confronted with objection handling all the time. And so you create FAQs around what is the common objection and how do we handle that objection. This was much the same. And that was very much confidence inducing. The idea or the sense that we are in control was really powerful, right? When all else is kind of out of control, the fact that we are controlling our little piece was important. While being fully honest, we don't know what tomorrow's gonna, but for today, this is how we're approaching it. Extending that sense of control bridged the gap of that was engendering a lack of confidence within our team, which would be felt by our residents. So we really attacked it that way. It was constant, consistent communication, arming them, not telling them, but this is how we are literally saying, this is how we approach this. Do not deviate. And here's why: creating a sense of understanding and then holding people accountable.
We drive around roads every day with guidelines and red lights and stop signs, and it keeps us out of making those collisions. I start thinking about, just in the tone of your voice and how you deliver that message, the strength and leadership in that, and it may not be a policy that they subscribe to now or whatever, but they at least have some groundwork for, this is where we are, this is where we're going. Yep. And they get on board with that. You've made some courageous moves too. I've heard you say things like in communications, like we're not on ILSs. We built our own technology and all of these things. At what point? I guess my point is, or my question is, what things did you? What assumptions did you test that going into all of this you thought might have been difficult, but it turned out to be a lot smoother than you anticipated?
So we thought we were going to see a broad impact to prospect, i.e., lead generation. We thought that with the dampening of the economy, you would see a resultant impact to movement. We also knew that if folks who are typically generally transient, multifamily is interesting, right? 50 to 60% of your resident population turns over every year, and it varies by property. But that's an interesting reality, which means, sure, folks are constantly bouncing. Fortunately, we have a footprint here where they're often bouncing from one of our properties to the next, but we knew that would be suppressed a bit. And so we had to figure out ways to continue to induce that, because our lease appetite wasn't going to, be quelled. We knew that there was going to be, because people were staying, we'd see, folks re-upping on their leases. And we did. I think everybody in this industry did. But we were concerned, candidly, with the ability to continue to generate high quality, qualified leads that in turn, and by extension, turned into leases. And so we knew there was going to be a lot of activity on ILS, as we were fortunate to not occupy them. And by ILS, we do participate with Apartment List. They're an exceptional partner for us. And you were asking about kind of to address your question about, as you were taking, what could be perceived as risks with new technology, where did the certainty or kind of the metal come from to choose to do that? Look, AI chatbots are not new. They're new. They're not even new to our industry. A number of prominent brands in our space have AI chatbots that we've seen. We built our own custom, but we know there's good tooling with LeaseHawk. Anyone Home, Knock has their own product. So it exists. We've been paying attention. Some of our properties have used them in the past. We've seen the migration from phone calls to chat with our general population. We had a strong sense that this was going to be a fit for us.
Yeah, that's great. And speaking of technology, I know you mentioned Smart Rent. You have a lot of that to step into the world that we now were, shifted to change into. Are you staffing properties now? How does that look at the property level? Yeah,
so we maintain full staff throughout. So we are very proud of the fact that we didn't have any sort of furlough or we are in fact hiring. We hired throughout the entire period. We have maintained full staffs. Our commitment to our residents is that there's a white glove experience, and we are not perfect. We fall down often, but we endeavor to be the best version of ourselves. So delivering on that promise, that's a contract we signed with our residents. We feel very proud to be one of the premier boutique brands in Arizona. We wear that, and we're very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to assume leadership within a company that was started 35 years ago by a framer and accountant who are ambitious and thoughtful.
Two great skills.
Yeah, terrific, and it's been lovely. And so we are very conscientious of that, and keeping our employees and standing in the gap with them during this period. Look, none of us had a model that included the COVID variable.
Right.
So by being abundantly conscientious of that fact and communicating it appropriately has been, I think, it has leveled this sense that folks are waiting for this top-down kind of directional stuff. It was more, hey, we're doing this together. If one of you guys sees something, we're out front doing our best to lead this, but you can certainly come up. There's zero power dynamic in this company. You can come in and say, I'm raising the flag. What I'm seeing doesn't look good. I'd advise you to stop and take a look before we move forward with anything else. That has happened consistently for the last, I guess we're at almost 12 months now.
Yeah. Are there things that won't go back by design? I mean, I know we had to, out of safety, amenities and different restrictions on the way that we operate. Are there things, and even some companies are working remotely. And I know you mentioned the distribution of the workforce. I mean, we've technically been a remote workforce forever, right? Regional offices and properties here and moving portfolios and things like that. And so, but most of the work happened at the office location or at the corporate office. And are there things that won't go back that you now learned is
Yeah.
more efficient? Or
This is a very good question, and I had made a point of wanting to note this with you, and I'm glad you reminded me. I think as leaders, we want to always look for the opportunity, right, in an unseen circumstance. So I mentioned one that emerged and materialized in a way that we hadn't anticipated, that has landed well with both our residents and our employees, and that is the scheduling of time with property teams, right? We don't have our offices open currently. They are still locked, again, out of an abundance of caution for our property teams. Like anybody else in this state, we suffered from, a modest amount of COVID exposure. And when that hits a property, it can take an entire property offline. So we've learned some things. Technology as a surrogate or a proxy can be utilized in a way that facilitates, right? I mentioned this term conduit. We're always looking for conduits that can expedite the experience, improve the experience, right, from both sides. And so the schedulers piece is going to stay. The AI chat tool is absolutely going to stay. The last piece of technology, and I think I mentioned this in June, I didn't anticipate bringing it up, but we also built our own CRM. And so, we specifically chose a PMS provider in Resman who operates an open platform because we want best of breed product at each of our functional areas. And if we can't find in the space, we'll build it. That is our orientation. We're not going to wait for it.
Right.
And so that takes time. That takes a commitment from a cost standpoint. If you're going to invest heavily, you need to have a product to deliver that provides value. When you ask us where the impetus and kind of the fortitude came from to approach it this way, we looked around in other industries, and I can say this candidly, and I'm not meaning to offend anybody, but it's more than anecdotal. I've been in this industry almost 4 years now. We are a bit antiquated in some of our best practices. So there's a lot of opportunity externally. So if you are wondering, like, if you're stuck with something, I would suggest, and by the way, a lot of you reached out to me after on LinkedIn because of this. I had no idea your reach. You have a tremendous reach. You guys can reach out and ask me about it. I'm happy to tell you kind of our approach. I'm an open book. I love the idea of doing this. Or if there's questions coming in, we feel very strongly about our industry, and we love our industry, and we're happy to help here. Some of you are probably going, "Hey, there's a light bulb moment. What industry should I look at externally? How did again, AI chatbots have been a thing, outside of multifamily for a while,
right?
So if you guys have any questions, feel free to pose the questions here with Patrick's team, or reach out to me. I'm happy.
Yeah, we probably have some we'll take here in a moment. You mentioned the 5-star and the white glove treatment.
Yeah.
I'm curious, maybe even employees that are activated in new ways that you maybe not have noticed before, with the new scheduling of the office, or perhaps it's new effective ways to communicate when it has to be in written form versus the spoken word, or here it is, let me show it to you. How do you control the brand at all these different touch points, and what employees sort of were activated in this new way that people discover properties? If they're not driving in, how do you control that brand experience through that journey? And I guess what shifts were made to teach and evolve that? I know we're just at the beginning stages of all this.
Yeah, so this is where a little luck comes in. So I mentioned we built our own CRM. We trialed a number of them in space. We didn't want to shrink to fit places we had outgrown. We say that a lot in my company. We're not different for different sake. We are absolutely fixated on one thing. We either save our clients money or we make them money. That's quite literally it. And to do that well, you have to do the other pieces that fall from that well. And so we built our own CRM, which coincidentally went live March 1st of last year, which was timed perfectly. Now, why did we do that? I think that's your question. And when you have new employees, how do you have visibility in whether they're in fact delivering that experience we endeavor to deliver, that white glove 5-star experience? It's a good question. So we built a CRM that focused on two things: call answer rate. One of the unspoken kind of, I think, unfortunate aspects of our industry is call answer rates are anemic. We were answering our phones, and we are very proud. And I will share, right? You got to give trust to get trust. I'll share. We are answering our phones at a clip sub 60%. 93% of our calls were happening within operating hours. Yes, our property teams are busy. No, that's not acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when you're dealing with that coveted Class A renter who makes up just 8% of the available renter universe.
Right.
It's a big deal to be on top of your game there. So we built a tool that focused specifically on that. We integrated those metrics once we started capturing them into our daily and our weekly for our clients, so they could see that this is our orientation, this is our focus. By getting to leads first, fastest, and professionally, we enhance or improve our ability to convert them to a lease. By converting them to a lease, we reduce the workload associated with processing prospects on property, higher value activities can be undertaken, and by extension, we're saving money in terms of ad spend. This is a win-win for everybody. Better prospect experience, more time to focus on higher value activities or equally valued activities. There's nothing higher value than manage your prospects. That's equal to everything else. And then improving that experience for the prospects. They're actually having the phone answered. This is a beautiful thing, right? And that's an expectation that needs to be more pervasive, I think, in our space. I mean, who am I to say? But that's something we want to focus on. March 1st, we launched this tool. It focused on call answer and engagement rates, right? We had this group, Dwell.io, build it for us. We built it on top of the Resman platform. It's our PMS. They work together great. We were able to launch it in a week. We knew we had something coming. And by really managing leads in that deliberate fashion, we've been able to ride through this storm in a way that has meant that we've had 71% of our properties deliver their record effective rent growth despite COVID in 2020. So through the entirety of the existence of our portfolio, 71% recorded their best year ever financially, despite COVID. And we believe a lot of it had to do with the fact that we became fixated on lead management.
Yeah, it's a great story to tell. Going into it, I think there was a lot of concern in what's going to happen, and it's exciting to hear that good leadership, sound leadership, and really aligning the technology and the people together. It's one thing to have the tool, but be able to communicate how to use it and the priorities of why we're using it and how it impacts the brand, all those things. Yes. Very important. It's exciting because now you're showing, hey, look, this paid off, this focus, this determination, this value.
Yeah.
We do have a question here from Gabe over here on LinkedIn, and she says, or let's see, yep, with all the great pivots, okay, we're talking about not necessarily the ones that we shifted to, but with all great pivots, do you have a framework for making decisions and implementing them?
Do we have a framework for making decisions and implementing them? Yeah, so this is a good question, Gabe, good question. Having spent 15 years in manufacturing, there's a lot of hierarchy, there's a lot of silo, there's a lot of power distance dynamic. And what that serves to do is arrest conversation and communication. And that's especially damaging if you don't have a shared kind of office, which we don't. I mentioned the distributed workforce.
Right.
What we do, we need to get better at it, candidly. And we are. Our president, John Carlson, is talk about fixated. He is about crowdsourcing. We are about crowdsourcing. So before we push anything out that's final and say this is an activity we're undertaking or a new approach, etc., we survey the team. So we administer two surveys a year that are broad surveys, but we survey key stakeholders, key decision makers, thought leaders, those that can manufacture consent when we in fact do deliver a change or something new. You have to have ambassadors for change with a distributed workforce. You have to know who your people are who move the needle from an influence standpoint, because they're the ones that are going to be able to influence outcomes. And if you don't include them in the conversation, their investment isn't there. And if they're not invested, the emotional piece that is really what kind of induces change, especially for those that are change averse, isn't there. You have to have somebody that emotionally connects, especially when it's somebody from property A and your property, or property 2 and your property 63, and you may not, your paths have never even crossed. The only thing you share is that you have the same badge on your name tag, right?
Sure.
So what we do before we undertake and how should I say, undertake a new change or a new approach, is we engage our general population. We engage key vendors. We engage clients. This is a team effort. We know one thing for sure. There's one thing that we're certain of, is that we don't know everything. We have been smacked in the face a ton, continue to, but it doesn't stop us. We fail quickly. That's orientation. We believe in trying and doing new things. If we make mistakes, we say, guess what? Bit of a grease fire. It didn't work out how we anticipated. We apologize. Thanks for taking the journey with us. We're going to, refrain from that, and we're going to try something new. So the pivot is spoken about. The pivot is considered thoughtfully. The pivot is announced appropriately. And then the pivot is abandoned if it's not something that works. We're not afraid to say we made a mistake. We're actually proud of that because it means we're trying.
Right.
Good question, Gabe.
Yeah. And do you pilot certain properties or do you just...
Always.
Yeah.
Again, another piece that we have to get better at is rolling out software, right? We recently rolled out the Henry Pay piece for our payment processing because it tucks neatly into our resident app. And, we had some fidelity issues with the resume overlay. And fortunately, we have strong engineers on the Henry side, and it was a strong team on the Resman side who collaboratively worked to fix the situation very quickly, but it was still a miss, right? So as hard as we've tried to preview, understand, surface bugs, squash them, do all the different things sometimes happen. In the case of Henry Pay, it was a volume issue. It was just everybody in that condensed period is going to pay. Did we have the appropriate resource allocation? We didn't. We solved it. It's done. But we didn't learn that during the 4-property preview period. So to answer your question, absolutely we preview. We preview in abundance. With our AI chat tool, we've previewed for the last 6 months. Why? Because you have to build natural language libraries. There's variations to these explicit questions you need to be able to answer. There's roughly 200 explicit questions you have to be able to answer. But there's 17 ways to say yes in the English language, right? So those with new technology, with new programs, you have to trial and error it before you can say, all right, we're going to battle with this.
Yeah, and Gabe makes a comment here, imperfect action is better than perfect action. I love it, and it goes to your point earlier.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, here's what we know now,
yes.
And we're moving forward with this.
That's right.
And you mentioned the ambassadors. How are you seeing the shape of the internal company in terms of all these technologies that you're bringing on? Because the model of who's evaluating these, identifying these, asking the questions. Sometimes we don't know that we don't know.
Yeah. And
we're kind of, like I said in my opening remarks, we're inside the bottle trying to read the label. We're not outside the industry. We're not getting that inspiration.
Yeah.
So how are you seeing? I guess what's next in who is it? The committees? Is it the investment teams? The chief innovation officers? How are you seeing people?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Evolve, I guess.
Yeah, so that is a very challenging question. So I think you're asking it from the vantage point of if you're not Mark Taylor, but aspire to embrace new technology, like how might you approach it?
Who is that? Is going to evaluate that?
Yeah, so it's so new to our industry. We've looked around, so there aren't. There's an abundance of chief technology officers. I wear that hat at Mark Taylor. So I'll just speak from my vantage point because I can't speak to it elsewhere. I mean, I can speak to it from American manufacturing, but that isn't germane here. I think, the approach we take is we want to say, who are they who do what we do well? Let's pay attention to how they're actioning. Let's pay attention to the entire multifamily universe. And then let's start to look outside industry and pay attention to the things that matter there as well, right? And see if we can draw inspiration. We aspire to be easily inspired, if that makes sense. Because we think there's always a better way. There's never a sense that we've gotten there, we've arrived, this is it, this is the best it can be. Never, never, never. Constantly looking for ways to level set, to re-level set. And we do that, honestly, because I mentioned it earlier, I feel like our industry, and this is anecdotal, our industry is a bit antiquated, and so there's so much opportunity for us to introduce new technology. So I think you should have your kind of your North Stars or your Lode Stars within the industry. We all go to industry conferences. We all watch multifamily stuff. Like, we want to know who the thought leaders are here. Start to identify those. And absent your own technologists, you do have an IT function generally. Let's lean on those folks. I think you'd be surprised at what you can harvest there. We have a very thoughtful IT department who are very well versed in new technology and aware of what's happening. So expand, ask questions. Don't be afraid to fail in full view. Nobody's expecting you to be to understand every aspect of building an AI chatbot, for example. But start somewhere. Start asking the questions. And absent hiring somebody specifically for the role whose job is to kind of surveil the field, future cast, look around the corner, understand what's coming, lean on your IT team, I think. Also, who's that individual in your corporate office and perhaps even within your property teams who seems to be tech savvy and really understand? They can be a voice for you. Throw ideas off of them. Have you ever used a chat tool if you're trying to buy furniture? Well, it turns out the furniture industry does a really good job with it, to be honest with you. We've drawn a lot of inspiration from what they've done. And then start to lean on your vendors. We have a strong partnership with SmartRent, who quickly integrated with our chat client so that you could, in fact, schedule a self-tour with our chat client. That was a neat conversation. There were learnings there that we were able to extract. We've learned a lot from our Resman relationship. We've learned a lot from, the team that's built our CRM and our AI chatbot, the Dwell team, or the Liftlytics team. So there's been a lot of leaning on people. We know what we don't know. We know what we do know. We don't have perfect knowledge about anything. We're constantly calibrating.
Yeah, I love that SmartRent technology or reference point, because it's like going to that doctor. I mean, when they're seeing other applications across multiple thousands of units, even at different asset types, even those questions, those sort of early learning stages thing, they can bring that value back to you in your organization, so you don't make a problem that somebody else has already made, or those types of things. So I like that.
Yeah.
One of my final questions here is, what's with the slow adoption, as we've spoken anecdotally about this, is the being a lagging in technology for the industry, and part of that is probably because the department operators have been really successful. I mean, many of them are cashing $1 million checks, and so it's like, why do I want to disrupt that, right?
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that in some ways, but at the same time, customer is going to drive the change at the end of the day, right?
That's right.
So with that, these stakeholders sometimes may be busy and hard to get attention or capture their focus. Is there a way to educate them about the need to invest in these types of things in communication?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So you're almost, in fact, influencing your manufacturing consent around a direction. So we've done, fortunately, there's ample data around the value of CRMs, how it improves engagement rates, how it improves conversion rates, how it improves, these various touch points that are measurables. And for everybody that's listening, you want to know what those metrics are that indicate performance. That's your vantage point from which to manage. So with the CRM, for example, if you start to see, if you're tracking a full portfolio, you have benchmark data. You can start to see if there's changes or shifts that are outside of your tolerance. And because you're watching, you're improving because you're able to manage to that. The key here for us was to extract the value propositions that have already been proffered by they who, outside of our industry, have come to market with similar tooling. How did they do it? What was their value message? How did they talk about it? And co-opt some of those so that we infuse those in our value pitch when we talked about it with our clients. Fortunately for us, our principals, they spent a considerable amount of time finding us when they brought us in. And we employ kind of the same approach. It's many interviews and homework assignments to really understand what we're getting and whether you're a fit and whether we're a fit for you, et cetera. So there's a sense of trust that percolates. And that's the basis or the foundation for our decision-making. We've earned that with them. We know that we're the right fit. And so I think that as you're sitting there listening to this, I think you want to get to a place of comfortableness where you do in fact feel confident that if somebody's kind of venturing out, trialing, assessing, bringing you a potential vendor who they want to preview with 2 of your properties, you feel okay or confident that that's probably worth pursuing, right? So what I'm saying is that it really is about getting it right at the point of hiring as well. They who hire in our organization spend a lot of time making sure. I mean, we are very deliberate, methodical there. We have as many misses as everybody else. But our attrition rate is much lower than industry because we really do endeavor to find the right people.
Yeah, that's great. And that goes with anything. If you're building a championship team, protecting the culture of the players and investing in them and
that's right.
And the brand that represents, make it special to be part of this team. And,
yes.
And as a result of that, the company stays committed to invest in you and grow
that's right.
not only their personal career, but the outcomes for the investors of which they serve. So I love talking with legacy operators, people that are looking forward thinking on innovation, technology, investments, and leadership. Yeah. The collision of all those things. This conversation has been amazing. Wish I could spend more time with you. And we got to have you back now that you're familiar with the new studio.
I love
it. Before we wrap, are there any final thoughts you want to leave our viewers with?
I've been so heartened and impressed by our industry and how we've strive to do the right thing by our employees and by our residents. I sit on the board for the AMA. I've seen, all of our competitors who are, we are honored by their effort to compete with us. And they bring their best every day here in this marketplace, they who we are familiar with. And we've paid attention and we've watched how they've been judicious and deliberate. And I think that is broadly what our industry has done. We're in an industry that, right or wrong, has some challenges right now. From a legislative standpoint, all of that. We've got some bad press, I think, that is unwarranted, candidly. And so, as somebody who's conscientious in my own life, that bleeds into my professional, I want to make sure we're doing the right thing. I have been so impressed by the thoughtfulness by which we've approached our residents, specifically in evictions and all of that. It's been really awesome. So I think as you're receiving this or hearing this, I think we all should take great pride in the fact that during a peak moment where all others may have been losing their heads, we were a point of strength for our employees and our residents. So from what I've seen with all of you out there that are viewing, kudos to you. Bravo. Bravo to us. Let's continue this. This is our new normal, this level of engagement, this thoughtfulness. Let's continue it. I'm proud of our industry. I'm proud of what we've delivered in the last year, and I'm looking forward to what's to come.
All right. Awesome to have you here. Appreciate you coming in, Dustin.
Terrific.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Multifamily Innovation Show. Please remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date on everything multifamily.